September 1945. Camp Hearne in Robertson County, Texas, housed approximately 3,000 German prisoners of war awaiting repatriation to occupied Germany. According to records preserved in the Texas Military Forces Museum archives, this facility represented one of over 700 POW camps established across the United States during World War II, with Texas hosting more than 50 of these installations due to its climate, available land, and distance from coastal invasion threats. The U.S. War Department initiated large-scale POW camp construction in 1943 following the North African Campaign, which produced tens of thousands of German and Italian prisoners requiring secure detention. Camp Hearne opened in early 1943, initially designed to accommodate 5,000 prisoners. The facility featured standard military barracks, mess halls, administrative buildings, medical facilities, and perimeter fencing with guard towers, all constructed according to Geneva Convention requirements for humane treatment of prisoners of war. German POWs at Camp Hearne included Wehrmacht soldiers captured in North Africa, Sicily, and later in the European theater, as well as Kriegsmarine sailors from disabled or captured vessels. Declassified military records indicate the camp also held several hundred female auxiliaries, nurses, clerks, radio operators, and other non-combatant personnel captured during Allied advances through France and Germany. These women, members of organizations like the Wehrmacht Hofrannenkorps, represented a frequently overlooked demographic in standard POW histories. If you're interested in evidence-based World War II history that examines lesser-known aspects of the conflict, please like and subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment indicating where you're watching from, and let us know what topics you'd like us to cover in future documentaries. The Geneva Convention of 1929, to which both the United States and Germany were signatories, established specific protocols for POW treatment. Prisoners were entitled to adequate food, shelter, medical care, and protection from physical harm. They could be required to work, but not in war-related industries, and they were to receive compensation for their labor. Camp commanders faced regular inspections by neutral parties, including Swiss Red Cross representatives, who documented conditions and reported violations to international authorities. Camp Hearne's population fluctuated throughout its operational period. Peak occupancy occurred in late 1944 and early 1945 as Allied victories in Europe produced increasing numbers of prisoners requiring processing and detention. By September 1945, with the war concluded, the camp's primary function shifted from detention to repatriation preparation. However, logistical challenges delayed the return of prisoners to Europe. Available shipping prioritized the transport of American troops returning home, creating a backlog of German POWs who remained in U.S. custody for months after hostilities ceased. Records from the Robertson County Historical Society document the complex relationship between Camp Hearne and the surrounding civilian community. Initial local reactions ranged from hostility to curiosity. Many residents had sons, husbands, or brothers serving overseas, fighting against German forces. The presence of enemy soldiers on Texas soil generated understandable tension. However, economic realities gradually modified these attitudes. The war had created severe labor shortages as American men enlisted or were drafted, leaving farms, ranches, and businesses understaffed. The War Department, recognizing both the labor crisis and the Geneva Convention provision allowing prisoner work details, established programs permitting POWs to work outside camp boundaries under guard supervision. German prisoners performed agricultural labor, cotton picking, harvesting, livestock management, for which farmers paid the U.S. government, which in turn provided prisoners with modest wages and camp scrip. Documentation from the National Archives reveals that by 1944, approximately 30,000 German POWs worked in Texas agriculture alone, contributing significantly to the state's wartime food production capacity. This labor proved essential for maintaining agricultural output despite the massive workforce. Depletion caused by military mobilization. Cotton growers, cattle ranchers, and crop farmers throughout Texas relied heavily on POW labor during critical harvest periods. Beyond agricultural work, some POWs with specialized skills were assigned to other sectors experiencing manpower shortages. Medical personnel represented a particularly valuable resource. The United States faced a critical shortage of doctors and nurses as medical professionals joined the military services. Civilian hospitals, especially in rural areas, struggled to maintain adequate staffing levels. Records from Hearne General Hospital, a modest facility serving Robertson County, indicate that beginning in 1945, the hospital administrator formally requested German medical personnel from Camp Hearne to supplement an understaffed nursing corps. Dr. Marcus Brennan, the hospital's chief physician, submitted documentation to military authorities demonstrating the facility's inability to handle patient loads with existing staff, particularly during influenza outbreaks and the normal demands of a rural medical practice. Military authorities approved the request following verification of the German nurses' credentials and medical training. According to archived correspondence, several German women who had served as Wehrmacht nurses possessed advanced training equivalent to or exceeding that of many American civilian nurses. Their experience treating battlefield trauma, managing mass casualty situations, and working with limited resources under extreme conditions made them highly qualified for civilian hospital work. The arrangement required strict protocols. German medical personnel worked only under direct American supervision. They wore modified uniforms distinguishing them from regular hospital staff. Armed guards initially accompanied them during transport to and from the hospital, though records indicate this requirement relaxed over time as prisoners demonstrated reliability and the war's conclusion reduced escape concerns. Community reactions to German medical personnel working in civilian hospitals varied significantly. Initial resistance came from families who had lost relatives in the European theater and viewed any German presence as offensive. Town meetings in Hearne and surrounding communities generated heated debates about the appropriateness of allowing enemy nationals to provide medical care to American citizens. However, practical considerations often overcame ideological objections. When staff shortages meant delayed treatments, longer emergency room wait times, and overworked American nurses facing exhaustion, the availability of qualified German medical personnel became increasingly appealing. Hospital administrators emphasized that POW medical staff followed the same professional standards required of all medical practitioners, and that refusing their assistance would compromise patient care. Understanding the qualifications of German medical personnel requires examining the Wehrmacht's medical service structure. Germany entered World War II with a well-developed military medical system based on decades of professional military medicine. Wehrmacht medical training emphasized rapid triage, surgical intervention under field conditions, and efficient casualty evacuation protocols. German military nurses underwent rigorous training lasting 12 to 18 months, including classroom instruction in anatomy, pharmacology, and surgical procedures, followed by clinical rotations in military hospitals. Those assigned to field hospitals gained extensive trauma experience treating combat casualties. By 1943 to 1945, as the war intensified and German forces suffered increasing casualties, medical personnel dealt with overwhelming patient volumes, developing expertise in managing complex injuries with limited resources. Documentation from the Library of Congress Veterans History Project includes testimony from American medics who encountered German field hospitals during the Allied advance through Europe. These accounts frequently note the professional competence of German medical personnel and the organized nature of their facilities, even under desperate circumstances. One American medical officer recorded observing a German field hospital near Aachen where nurses and doctors continued treating patients despite the facility's imminent capture, demonstrating commitment to medical ethics superseding military loyalty. The Wehrmacht medical corps included women in various capacities through organizations like the DRK Schwesternschaft, German Red Cross Sisterhood, and the Wehrmacht Helfer in Inkorps. These women served as nurses, surgical assistants, and medical administrators across all theaters of war. Unlike combat soldiers who might harbor strong ideological commitment to Nazi policies, many medical personnel focused primarily on their professional obligations to treat wounded, regardless of political considerations. The employment of German medical personnel in American civilian hospitals occurred against the backdrop of Germany's catastrophic home front situation. Allied strategic bombing campaigns, initiated by Britain in 1940 and massively expanded with American participation from 1942 onward, devastated German cities and inflicted enormous civilian casualties. The bombing of Dresden on February 13th to 15th, 1945, represents one of the most controversial episodes of the air war. Dresden, a major cultural and industrial center in Saxony, housed numerous refugee populations fleeing the advancing Soviet armies. On the night of February 13th, British Royal Air Force Bomber Command launched Operation Thunderclap, dispatching over 800 aircraft carrying incendiary and high-explosive bombs. The attack created a firestorm, a phenomenon where intense heat generates winds that feed oxygen to fires, creating temperatures exceeding 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The firestorm consumed Dresden's historic center, destroying the Frauenkirche Cathedral, the Semper Opera House, and approximately 13 square miles of urban area. Historical estimates of casualties vary significantly. German authorities immediately after the war claimed 135,000 deaths. Modern historical scholarship, based on detailed archival research, estimates between 25,000 and 40,000 fatalities, with uncertainty arising from the refugee population's undocumented presence. Dresden was neither the first nor the last German city subjected to massive aerial bombardment. Hamburg experienced devastating firebombing in July 1943, Operation Gomorrah, which killed approximately 37,000 civilians. Berlin endured repeated raids throughout 1943 to 1945. Cologne, Essen, Dortmund, and numerous other industrial and population centers suffered similar destruction. By war's end, Allied bombing had killed approximately 400,000 German civilians and destroyed approximately 40% of Germany's urban housing stock. The strategic justification for area bombing evolved throughout the war. Initially, RAF Bomber Command targeted military and industrial facilities. However, limitations in navigational accuracy and offensive German measures made precision bombing difficult. British Air Marshal Arthur Harris advocated for dehousing, destroying residential areas to disrupt war production by rendering workers homeless and breaking civilian morale. American strategic bombing doctrine initially emphasized precision daylight raids against specific military-industrial targets. However, operational realities, weather conditions preventing visual bombing, heavy losses to German air defenses led to increased use of area bombing techniques similar to British methods. The moral and strategic debates surrounding these policies continue among historians. By September 1945, with Germany defeated and occupied by Allied forces, the United States held approximately 375,000 German POWs in camps across the country. Repatriation planning presented enormous logistical challenges. The War Department needed to transport these prisoners back to Europe while simultaneously managing the return of millions of American service members. Shipping capacity represented the primary constraint. The U.S. Merchant Marine and Navy transport vessels that had carried troops to Europe now faced competing demands, bringing American soldiers home, transporting occupation forces to Germany and Japan, moving supplies to occupied territories, and returning posts to their home countries. Military planners prioritized American personnel, naturally creating delays in POW repatriation. Additionally, political considerations complicated the process. The Allied powers had divided Germany into 4 occupation zones controlled by the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. Prisoners' destinations depended on their home regions within Germany. Those from areas now under Soviet control faced particular uncertainty, as relations between the Western Allies and the USSR deteriorated rapidly in late 1945. Camp Hearne and similar facilities shifted from detention centers to processing stations. Prisoners underwent medical examinations, background checks to identify war criminals or Nazi Party officials requiring special handling, and documentation verification. The International Committee of the Red Cross coordinated with military authorities to ensure families in Germany received notification of their relative status and expected return dates. Records indicate that repatriation from Camp Hearne began in November 1945, with transports departing from East Coast ports. However, the process extended through much of 1946. Some prisoners remained in U.S. custody until late 1946, nearly 18 months after Germany's surrender. During this extended detention period, camp conditions remained stable, work programs continued, and prisoners received increasing privileges as security concerns diminished. The extended presence of German POWs in the United States created opportunities for social interaction between prisoners and American civilians that military authorities had not anticipated. Official policies strictly prohibited fraternization, social or romantic relationships between Americans and German prisoners. These regulations aimed to maintain discipline, prevent security breaches, and respect public sentiment regarding enemy nationals. However, enforcing non-fraternization policies proved challenging, particularly as the war ended and prisoners began working alongside American civilians in agricultural and industrial settings. Documentation from the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service reveals that approximately 500 marriages occurred between German POWs or displaced persons and American citizens in the immediate post-war years, though incomplete record keeping suggests the actual number may have been higher. These marriages occurred despite significant legal, bureaucratic, and social obstacles. Military regulations initially prohibited POW marriages. However, as prisoner status shifted from enemy combatants to persons awaiting repatriation, and as their work integration deepened, authorities gradually relaxed restrictions. The War Brides Act of 1945, though primarily intended for American servicemen bringing foreign spouses home, created legal frameworks that could be adapted for POW marriage cases. American citizens seeking to marry German POWs faced complex procedures. They required authorization from military authorities, verification that the POW had no war crimes record, and proof of the relationship's legitimacy. After marriage, the German spouse needed to apply for immigration status, which involved additional background checks and documentation. The entire process could take months or years, during which couples faced uncertainty about whether approval would be granted. Social reactions to these marriages varied dramatically across communities. Small towns in rural areas often exhibited strong opposition. Families who had lost sons or husbands fighting in Europe viewed relationships with former enemies as betrayals. Local businesses sometimes refused service to couples where one partner was German. Churches faced pressures from congregants objecting to performing marriage ceremonies for such unions. However, individual circumstances often modified general hostility. When German POWs worked alongside Americans over extended periods, personal relationships sometimes developed that transcended national enmities. Germans who demonstrated strong work ethic, professional competence, and decent character occasionally earned respect from initially hostile Americans. In cases where German medical personnel saved American lives or demonstrated exceptional skill, gratitude could overcome prejudice. Repatriation proved particularly complex for prisoners whose home regions fell within the Soviet occupation zone of Germany. The USSR controlled approximately 40% of pre-war German territory, including major population centers like Berlin, jointly occupied, Leipzig, Dresden, and Rostock. Approximately 40% of German POWs held in Western custody originated from these regions. American and British authorities faced difficult decisions regarding these prisoners' disposition. Returning them to Soviet-controlled territory meant surrendering them to a regime with documented records of harsh treatment of German prisoners. Soviet POW camps in Siberia and other remote regions held hundreds of thousands of German soldiers captured on the Eastern Front under conditions far worse than those in American or British facilities. Declassified State Department correspondence reveals that Western officials debated the ethics and politics of repatriating German prisoners to Soviet control. Some argued that the Geneva Convention required returning prisoners to their home regions, regardless of which power controlled those areas. Others contended that returning prisoners to almost certain harsh treatment violated humanitarian obligations. The compromise solution involved informing German prisoners of conditions in Soviet zones and offering them choices where possible. Prisoners from Soviet-controlled regions could request resettlement in Western zones, though this required surrendering claims to property and family connections in their home areas. Many prisoners accepted this option, preferring uncertain futures in Western Germany to probable detention in Soviet camps. Family reunification presented agonizing challenges. German prisoners with wives and children in Soviet-controlled areas faced choices between returning to families under Soviet rule or remaining in Western custody with hopes of eventually bringing families west. The Iron Curtain descended rapidly in 1946-1947, making cross-border family reunification increasingly difficult. The International Red Cross operated family tracing services attempting to locate separated relatives and facilitate communication, but bureaucratic obstacles and Cold War tensions severely limited effectiveness. Historical analysis of German POW experiences in American captivity reveals generally favorable conditions compared to their treatment in other Allied facilities, particularly Soviet camps. German prisoners in the United States received adequate food, medical care, and shelter. While conditions varied among camps and work details, systematic mistreatment was rare, and Geneva Convention violations, when they occurred, were investigated and addressed. Oral histories collected by the Library of Congress Veterans History Project include numerous accounts from former German POWs describing their American captivity. Common themes include surprise at the abundance of food compared to wartime Germany. Medical care quality also impressed former prisoners. American military medical facilities treated POW injuries and illnesses with the same standards applied to American personnel. Prisoners requiring surgery or specialized treatment received it without discrimination. This contrasted sharply with conditions on the Eastern Front, where medical resources had collapsed under the strain of massive casualties and supply failures. Work programs provided purposeful activity and modest income. While some prisoners resented agricultural labor, particularly in summer heat, most preferred working to camp idleness. The wages earned, though paid in camp scrip rather than currency, could be used to purchase additional food, tobacco, and personal items at camp canteens. Some prisoners accumulated savings that they could convert to dollars upon repatriation. Cultural and recreational opportunities varied by camp, but generally included sports facilities, musical instruments, theatrical productions, and educational courses. Camp libraries contained books in German. Prisoners organized their own entertainment, forming orchestras, sports leagues, and discussion groups. American authorities permitted these activities as methods for maintaining morale and preventing disciplinary problems. Religious services were provided for both Protestant and Catholic prisoners. Camp commanders authorized chaplains to conduct services in German. This accommodation, particularly during Christmas and Easter observances, provided important psychological support for prisoners far from home during significant religious holidays. German prisoners repatriated to occupied Germany encountered a country transformed almost beyond recognition. The Third Reich's collapse had produced not just military defeat, but comprehensive societal devastation. Major cities lay in ruins from Allied bombing and ground combat. Transportation infrastructure, railways, bridges, roads, had been systematically destroyed. Industrial capacity was reduced to a fraction of pre-war levels. Agricultural production had plummeted due to labor shortages, disrupted distribution systems, and widespread destruction of farming equipment and livestock. The humanitarian crisis was staggering. Approximately 11 million ethnic Germans fled or were expelled from Eastern European territories, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, creating massive refugee flows into occupied Germany. These displaced persons required food, shelter, and medical care in a country already struggling to support its existing population. Additionally, millions of former soldiers returned home to find families dead, homes destroyed, and employment non-existent. Food shortages reached crisis levels in the winter of 1945–1946. Official rations in the British occupation zone dropped to as low as 1,000 calories per day, well below subsistence levels. Malnutrition became widespread, particularly among children and elderly populations. The black market flourished as desperate civilians traded possessions for food. American cigarettes became an informal currency, more valuable than occupation marks. The occupation powers divided administrative responsibilities according to occupation zones. The American zone included Bavaria, Hesse, and parts of Baden-Württemberg. The British controlled the industrial Ruhr region and northern Germany. France received smaller southwestern territories. The Soviet zone encompassed eastern Germany, including Saxony, Thuringia, and Brandenburg. Berlin, though deep within the Soviet zone, was jointly occupied by all four powers, each controlling a sector of the capital. Initial occupation policies aimed to prevent German military revival and punish Nazi leadership. Allied authorities implemented denazification programs requiring Germans to complete questionnaire detailing their activities during the Nazi period. Those who held Nazi Party membership or positions in party organizations faced potential exclusion from employment, property confiscation, or prosecution. War crimes trials, most famously at Nuremberg, prosecuted major Nazi officials for crimes against humanity. However, by 1947, Cold War tensions shifted American priorities. Rather than maintaining Germany in a weakened state, U.S. policy moved toward rebuilding West German economic capacity as a bulwark against Soviet expansion. The Marshall Plan, announced in 1947, provided substantial aid for European recovery, including Western occupation zones of Germany. This assistance funded infrastructure reconstruction, industrial revival, and currency stabilization. The German POW experience in the United States represents a relatively understudied aspect of World War II history, overshadowed by combat narratives, Holocaust documentation, and major strategic decisions. However, for the approximately 400,000 Germans held in American camps, this experience shaped their understanding of America and influenced post-war German-American relations. Former POWs returning to Germany often brought favorable impressions of American society. They had witnessed American material abundance, technological sophistication, and treatment that, while maintaining security measures appropriate for prisoners, generally respected human dignity. These positive impressions contrasted sharply with Nazi propaganda depicting Americans as corrupt, weak, or barbaric. In the post-war period, as West Germany aligned with Western democracies in opposition to Soviet communism, these personal connections reinforced broader geopolitical shifts. Former POWs who experienced American captivity humanely became living testaments, contradicting Nazi ideological claims about American character. Their accounts contributed to German public opinion gradually accepting American presence and leadership in Western European security arrangements. Some former POWs maintained connections with Americans they met during captivity. Correspondence between former prisoners and camp guards, agricultural employers, or civilians they worked alongside continued for years or decades after repatriation. These personal relationships created informal networks connecting German and American communities, fostering cultural understanding that complemented official diplomatic relations. The marriages between German POWs and American citizens, though numerically small, carried symbolic significance. These unions demonstrated that personal relationships could transcend national enmities, that individuals could recognize common humanity despite recent wartime violence. The families formed from these marriages, particularly children who grew up with both German and American cultural influences, embodied the possibility of reconciliation and the construction of new identities beyond narrow nationalism. Documentation of these marriages remains incomplete due to the sensitive political nature of such unions during the immediate post-war period. Social stigma meant many couples avoided public attention. Record-keeping inconsistencies complicate efforts to establish comprehensive statistics. However, available evidence suggests these marriages generally succeeded at rates comparable to or exceeding general population divorce rates, indicating that despite unusual origins and significant obstacles, many couples built stable, lasting relationships. The history of German POWs in Texas and other American locations during World War II and its immediate aftermath offers several significant insights into broader historical processes. First, it demonstrates the complex nature of wartime societies, where official enemies could, under certain circumstances, develop working relationships or even personal connections that defied simple categorizations of friend versus foe. Second, it illustrates how practical necessities, labor shortages, medical emergencies, resource scarcities could overcome ideological objections and generate surprising cooperation. American communities initially hostile to German prisoner presence gradually accepted their labor contributions when economic benefits became apparent. Hospitals short-staffed due to war mobilization accepted German medical personnel when the alternative meant inadequate patient care. Third, the POW experience reveals the importance of humane treatment in shaping post-conflict outcomes. American adherence to Geneva Convention standards, while not perfect, created conditions where German prisoners could recognize American values in practice rather than propaganda. This recognition facilitated post-war German-American reconciliation and supported Germany's integration into Western democratic institutions. Fourth, the documentation of marriages between former enemies underscores the resilience of human connection even in contexts of profound trauma and violence. Individuals who lost family members, homes, and countries to wartime destruction nevertheless found the capacity to form new relationships and build futures together. These unions, while exceptional, demonstrated possibilities for moving beyond cycles of revenge and perpetual enmity. The legacy of German POWs in America extends beyond immediate post-war years. Veterans of Camp Hearne and similar facilities returned to Germany carrying memories of Texas, of American civilians, of experiences that shaped their understanding of the former enemy. Their children and grandchildren inherited these memories, creating family histories that linked German and American experiences in unexpected ways. Current historical scholarship continues examining these connections, utilizing oral histories, archived correspondence, immigration records, and local historical society documentation to reconstruct a fuller picture of POW life in America and its long-term consequences. This research enriches our understanding of World War II's complexity, reminding us that even total war involved human relationships that transcended military conflicts. The story of German POWs in Texas, their work in civilian facilities, and the occasional marriages that resulted represents a footnote in standard World War II histories. However, for the individuals involved, the prisoners, the American civilians who employed them, the families formed from unlikely romances, these experiences constituted profound life events that shaped their identities and futures. Their stories deserve preservation and analysis as part of the comprehensive historical record of humanity's most destructive conflict and the difficult process of building peace from its ruins.